Welcome to Writer to Writer. I am Mary Sue Koeppel, the editor of Calliope, and with me today is Leslie Schwartz, an award-winning novelist from California. Welcome, Leslie.
Hi.
Leslie, as we get started, maybe the audience would like to know a little bit about your background. So could you kind of tell us how you became a writer and a little bit about the background of what you're writing?
How I became a writer. I like that question because it implies that it was a decision. And in fact, it really wasn't a decision for me. I always wrote. And I think that I used writing as a way to articulate my thoughts when I was too shy to speak them. And so from there, I just sort of developed, I just naturally developed the skills to write. So I've been writing for a long time. And I started a master's program in writing, but I didn't finish it. I'm just pretty much a self-taught writer. And I started with poetry and then moved on to short stories. And then I wrote my first novel, Jumping the Green, which actually began as a short story and then just kept growing and growing. And then followed by Angels Crest, which is my second novel.
And you're into a third novel now.
I'm into a third novel.
You probably have a lot of ideas for the things that will happen after that. Leslie, you grew up in California. You grew up in the West Coast. I know you're a bit familiar with other parts of the country. One of the things that you have talked about is the way in which where you live influences what you write.
Yeah, I really do use my community and California and the topography and the landscape and all the sentient aspects of California filter into my work. It's what I know the best, and it's what I love too. So it becomes a part of my work. I don't think I've placed anything outside of California. I might have, but I can't think. The two novels, definitely not. Possibly in a short story, but I think there was one short story that took place in Jamaica.
Okay.
But most of it's California, yeah, definitely.
But what strikes me as I read your pieces, I have never been to California. Been very far to the west. I think Grand Canyon is the furthest. But I didn't need to have been to California to enjoy your writing. So when you say that you use sense of place in California, that's not going to in any way prohibit somebody from enjoying your work.
I actually, no, because really that's not the focus of my work. It's always character-driven. And so I think people identify with the characters.
Yeah.
And the place is just backdrop to that.
Talk about your characters and what you're concerned about as you develop a book.
Well, I think my characters, I've always believed that character is the story. Mm-hmm. I tell my students that character is story, not plot. Plot is sort of ancillary. It's the thing that sort of motivates the action, but what really matters is the character. That's what people identify with. And so I spend in the development phases of my novel, which is pretty much writing the whole thing. It always feels like it's just developing as I go along. I spend a lot of time creating character, and I think one of the things I always look for is, or try to define for each character, is what is their central conflict. Mm-hmm. And also, what is unique about them? Do they have some kind of strange quirk? Do they have some sort of some aspect of their personality that can maybe metaphorically define their spiritual sides? And so really for me, any endeavor, any creative writing that I do is about developing and creating character, mostly.
And when you start a story, are you starting with a person, a character, a theme?
That's a good question. Because I think, when I sit here and talk about how character is the only thing, that's important, I really think that theme is also the other part of it. And sometimes, like the novel that I'm working on now, I wanted to write a love story. So that's sort of what started it. And I think from that, then I thought, well, okay, I need to get some characters, and then what are some of the themes around so it started as this broad thematic concept, and then I narrowed it and focused it down, and I think it became sort of the interplay between the theme and the characters, and how I can create characters to further that theme and the story that I want to tell. But I think, theme is definitely a part of it. I mean,
Would you say your other books started with theme? This one, you're saying there.
You know, I don't, you know, I'm thinking about Jumping the Green. You know, that really was the character. That character drove that story for me. And it was her conflict that even created the situations, I think. In Angels Crest, I know that the things that readers say about the book is that they identified with the characters, that the characters were the main thing. And yet I was really wanting to uncover some issues about grief and suffering and redemption and grace. So that theme's, Angels Crest seems more sort of two-pronged that way, whereas Jumping the Green was definitely a character-driven, propelled by this character that was so tortured and conflicted.
Yeah, I guess that's why I'm asking you that question, because I can't imagine Jumping the Green starting with a theme.
No, it was really her. It was really Louise that propelled that story, and it was sort of almost like a flame. The writing of it was just this burst, and then it was over. You know, it just ended.
Her conflict was Louise's conflict.
I think that on the outside, the conflict was her grief over her sister's death. But I think on a deeper level, it was her own sense of self and her own sense of identity. And I think that she identified herself and defined herself against her sister. And so when her sister died, who was she?
Yes.
And so I think that was sort of the really internalized part of her grief, was that that part that she thought she went with her sister, and so who was left? And so really it was a journey, I think, of self-discovery.
I think that to me is an extremely profound theme. So many people try to write about grief, but when they analyze it, it's kind of an inward search for a recovery. But you're saying what the source of the desperation was, and therefore how she had to go through all these struggles in order to come into her own person. And when people do it, sometimes they do husband and wife, but yours was so beautifully done, sister to sister.
Yeah.
Totally new way of thinking about it.
Yeah. And I think it was also this idea that I don't think that people, you know, I create these characters and I create fictional environments, but it's also real to me. And I don't think that people, I think that people really have to bottom out to find out what it is they need.
Yeah.
So I think that actually the lucky people are the ones who really fall and are able to come back up. Because I think some people also can just live their lives in this plane of I'm just going to go about my life and not really understand even that they have discontent. Yeah. So for Louise, it was a complete bottoming out in order for her to become a human being.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And some of your other characters do the same thing in Angels Crest.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a recurring theme for me.
Now I can't wait to see how your lovers do it.
Yeah. Me too.
You were talking one of these workshops that I was in with you about the creation of structure and how structure really forms your novel as you work through the writing of it. Would you talk about that a bit?
Yeah. To me, structure is the most important craft element of writing. Mm-hmm. And I have to create my structure before I sit down. And I learned this as I continued to write. I didn't know it when I first started writing, but for me to feel safe in order to explore the creative terrain, I need a structure. And what I mean by that is I don't need to know how my plot is going to develop. What I need to know is how am I going to tell the story? Mm-hmm. It's a really simple question. And so for me, for Jumping the Green, I decided, well, it was going to take place, it's always an issue of time. What is the time period? And how are we going to deal with the alternating chapters and stuff? So in Jumping the Green, for instance, I did alternating past and present chapters. And I thought of that. I realized, actually, that that's what I was going to do by the time I got to the second chapter. And I just continued to do it throughout. And then in Angels Crest, before I sat down, I had some of the characters in mind. I had the theme in mind. Then I really spent a lot of time questioning how I was going to tell the story or structure it, and I came up with alternating points of view. And then once that's settled, I can just go ahead and tell the story. I don't have any, I know how I'm going to do it, so I never have to think of that again. And I have found that if I don't have a structure, it's not going to progress. It'll die. Usually at about page 150, I notice it just kind of dies. So I need that structure.
Well, excuse me.
No, go ahead.
You were talking about this novel that you're working on now. When you got to about page 200 and something, you had to start over. Now, was that a structure?
That was not structure. What happened there was that was a theme problem, because I was exploring, I think, see, the way I look at writing is that it's all rewriting. So to me, to have to throw out 267 pages is not a big deal. I mean, people just panic when I tell them that. But to me, I think that's great, because that just means that I finally got to a place where I've started to discover the story. And there's an evolution, there's a sort of a creative evolution that goes on as you continue writing. And I think what happened by the time I got to page 267, whatever it was, 260, I don't know, I realized that one of my characters really had to become bigger. And with her introduction, everything changed. And so it became about 4 people instead of 3, and that, of course, changed so much of the story. So I had to, and then also with her development and creation, the story, I found my story. I found what it was I was trying to say, and on the flip side of that, why it was so hard, why it felt so awkward to write it up until then. And once she became a full character, the voice settled down, my tone settled down, everything kind of just settled down, and the story just began to flow. But I had to start over from page 1, but that was okay. I didn't mind.
You talked about the creative process, and as a writer, how you access that creative process.
What did I say?
Well, we're talking about going out in the morning.
Oh, right, with my dog.
That's just a little part of it.
Yeah, I have this dog. His name is Spencer, and he's my writing dog, I guess, because he's big 90-pound golden retriever. And I live in the neighborhood I live in Los Angeles is called Echo Park, and there's a big open space right by my house. And it's not a park; it's trails. It's a lot of wildlife. I see coyotes, and I mean, it's really rattlesnakes. It's wild, and I take my dog out in the morning, every morning, and I think about what I want to accomplish that day when I sit down to write. So I would say that most of my writing is thinking. Mm-hmm. I spend more time thinking about what I'm going to do and less time actually typing it on the screen. I plan it out almost, I think, okay, it's chapter 13, what's the objective for that chapter, what do I need to do next? And then I can actually go into my office and it just comes out because I've got it planned in my head. So it makes it easier for me to think it through first.
But you're not planning words.
No.
You're planning.
But sometimes the words do come, and then I'm struggling because I don't have a piece of paper or a pen, or I have to try to remember, because I'll find a phrase that I really love, and often I lose it. I forget, by the time I get home, because it's about a 4-mile walk. So, but normally it's just, what is my objective, my writing objective for the day? I approach it as if it's a job, and I set goals. I mean, it's really, it's not a loosey-goosey thing for me. It's a very sort of strict discipline, and I approach it that way. How much I need to get done each day, and I stick to it, pretty much.
So then what would be a schedule?
Well, I'm a morning writer. I was talking to I just was at this book festival, and a bunch of us writers were talking about when we write, and some people are night writers, and some people have kids, and they have to write at certain times of the day. My daughter wakes up, at a certain time, so I usually try to do most of the work before she wakes up, and then for an hour afterwards. So I'm most creative in the morning. And by 10 o'clock, it's like the day is already over for me. So I'm done writing by 10 or 11.
And when do you do your editing then?
It's part of the writing for me. What I do, my process is, let's say I write 5 chapters, I'll print that out, and then I'll take it home with me that night. And then I'll read that, and I'll do the editing on the page. And then the next morning when I go in, I'll make those changes. And part of the reason I like to do that is it just gets me back into the universe of my work. And then I go on and create the new work. So I'm sort of editing and writing as I go along. I just try to stay always connected to it, always connected to the piece in some way, whether it's editing, writing, or thinking about it.
So there's never a time when you leave the office and you say, okay, this is done, now I wonder what the heck I'm going to do next.
I never have that.
You never have that problem because you built in the process of working consistently.
Yeah, and I think that once the story, maybe I'll have that question in the beginning because I'm not sure of my story, but once I have it, I really feel like I know it almost, I mean, I hate to say this, but it almost writes itself. If I am quiet and patient with it, it almost writes itself. I don't really have to think that hard about it. In fact, I don't think that hard about it, you know? I try to let it come as naturally as possible.
How do you know when something that you write is good?
I don't know. I mean, I always think it's good, and then I'll come back to it, and it's horrible, or it is good.
Yeah.
My first impression of it being good is usually wrong, though. I don't know. You know, that is the difficult part of being a writer because you really want some outside validation. You want other people to say that's good, because I can't judge for myself.
So you belong to writing groups?
Yes.
And you work with an editor?
Yes. And an agent. My agent is he's a great reader. He's a very strong literary reader, and I trust him.
You know, there was something that you said that was very intriguing to me, and that is that your writing comes out of your deep spiritual life. Would you mind sharing a little?
Sure. I think for a long time writing was my spiritual life, and then I realized that it's an extension of my spiritual life, and I'm not one of those people who think like God, you know, the words of God come through me and out onto the page, you know, like I'm the mouthpiece of God. I don't ever presume that.
I wasn't asking.
But I've heard people say that though, and it's very scary. But I do think that writing requires prayer and meditation and some kind of conscious contact with, you know, faith. Whatever, however you want to, you know, I tell people I'm not even aligned with any religion or anything. I just have a deep spiritual life. And I think I spend a lot of time in meditation. And, you know, I ask for help sometimes. You know, or to give me I need an idea. I need to work through this. And so my writing isn't my spiritual life anymore. But I think it's an extension of it. It comes from that place, that mystery, and that place of faith, which is a mysterious place. You know, the whole thing of you have to have faith kind of thing. It's a mystery.
Do you think it's linked to the creative process?
Yes, absolutely.
How?
Gosh, I don't know. I really don't. It's a feeling for me. I can't describe it. It's very hard to articulate. I've had that question asked to me before, and I really don't have an answer. I think that it's linked because it's mysterious and because it comes from here's the thing, it requires you to be honest, and it requires you to take risks, and it requires you to work in solitude, and it requires you to be faithful. And I think all of those things that are part of the creative process are also the same things that are part of having a spiritual life. So I just see the two of them as part of the same thing.
And some people would just give it different names, perhaps.
I think so. I think so, because some people aren't comfortable talking about faith or spirituality, and so there's a different name for it. But I think it's kind of all the same thing. I think that it requires discipline, too, and I think to develop any kind of spiritual life also requires discipline, just like writing does. The idea that it just sort of comes out of some ether, you know, and it's this, I don't believe that. I believe that the way that we access ourselves creatively and spiritually comes from a lot of discipline and hard work and, you know, thoughtfulness and meditation. There's a myth, I think, about the creative process that we're just these, you know, we can just create because we're just divinely, but that's not true. It's work and discipline, and it's work, you know.
One of the things that intrigues us as we do these programs is the question, what is your advice to writers? And I've been getting at that question in lots of backhanded ways here, but would you like to add to what you've been saying?
My advice is just to write. I mean, I think students come looking for the answer. What can I do to become a published writer, you know? And the answer is just write. Stop talking about it. Just do it, you know? Get up every day and do it. And then the other half of it is you have to have courage. If you're going to do it, go all the way.
Meaning?
Don't hold back. I have students who will maybe write a love story and they won't talk about sex, or a story about grief and they won't talk about death, you know, or a story of drug addiction and they won't talk about drug addiction. You know, they go around the issues. And I think if you're going to do it at all, then you have to do it all the way. Otherwise, you're not honoring the creative process.
You're talking about the theme or the content of what it is that you're writing
about.
Yeah,
go for it.
Yeah.
Be dangerous, you know? Take some risks.
Risks in terms of your reader, in terms of your audience?
In terms of yourself.
Good.
Because I think that if you are honest and you are writing from your true place, that you will always find somebody who identifies with you. But if you're writing falsely and without that kind of risk, you know, that sort of center of the gut truth, then no one will identify with the work. It has to come from that place of honesty. And you have to be willing to have people read the book and say, I cannot even go past that because I don't relate. You know, like a lot of people didn't like Jumping the Green because of the sex in it or because of the self-destruction that this character went through. And that's okay. I couldn't write it any other way. I wasn't willing to write it in a half measures. And I think that you have to be willing to take those risks.
But that's what made it a good book.
Well, thank you. I mean, I hope so.
Yes, you won a major award for this. Could you give us the name of it?
It was the James Jones Literary Society Award for Best First Novel.
And it's the best first novel I have ever read, Leslie.
Thank you.
And I've read lots of first novels as editor of Koeppel. But it's a beautifully done piece. I just encourage anybody who has the comfort zone there to read the book because it's a beautifully crafted book.
Thank you.
With powerful meaning about grief and recovery and grace, which I love as your themes. Changing just a little bit, we have a little bit of time left. You have obviously been a successful marketer of your books. Could you talk to us a little bit about the process, the difference between your first book, your second book, the books that are to come?
The great thing about failure is that it teaches you how to do it right the next time. So I'm never afraid if I make mistakes. And the first mistake I made on Jumping the Green was not to market it. And I learned from that the writer has another job, unfortunately, if you want people to read the book, and that is you have to go out and sell it. And so what I've done is just researched organizations and communities that hold luncheons, and I set up readings, and I'll travel. I mean, I am really willing to do anything because it's my baby, you know, and I'm willing to do anything. But you have to be sort of methodical. You have to be businesslike about it, which is kind of a drag because writers are not that terribly businesslike. But once you start uncovering the secret sources, there's a million organizations out there that support writers, that host readings, and there's a set audience, and they'll all buy your book, and then they'll tell somebody, and you know, and you have to. It's sort of shameless in a way. You have to be shamelessly self-promoting, and it's very difficult. How can you possibly be humble when you're giving a reading, and when it's all about me, me, me? So it's a very difficult, sort of tenuous place to be for me personally, but I learned that that's also part of the job. If I think about it that way, it's just a job, then I can get through it. You know, and it doesn't sort of muck up the other part, which is the beautiful part, which is writing.
Leslie, we are going to be coming to a close right here quite soon. Is there something that you would like to say to an audience that we haven't covered this morning, this afternoon?
Oh, I don't know. You know, read a lot and write. Just enjoy the world of literature because it's out there and it's a huge world. You know, it's a whole untapped resource for the imagination. And I think people need to be reading and writing.
Reading and writing.
Yeah.
Leslie, thank you for sharing
Thank
with
you.
us today. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. This has been Writer to Writer, and I'm Mary Sue Koeppel, the editor of Calliope, with Leslie Schwartz, the novelist. Thank you for joining us.